Welcome to the Numbers Game, the show where analytics meets the action and data drives the decisions. I'm Cynthia Frelund. It is the NFL postseason, and this is our wildcard weekend show, where together we'll dive deep into the stats that define this week's remaining 4 wildcard matchups. We'll uncover how the data makes all the difference because it's not just about what happens, it's about why it happens and how the numbers help tell the story. I mentioned this on the Saturday primer, but it is worth repeating. I live in Southern California and we are experiencing some terrible fires. My family and I live far enough away from the danger zone so that we're really only dealing with some smoke and ash. I am so grateful to everyone who's reached out to make sure that we are safe. Many of my colleagues and friends are evacuated at the very least, and if you are impacted, I certainly hope you are doing as well as you can be. I found some great ways to support the firefighters and displaced animals. If you'd like that information, I can certainly give it to you. Just reach out. And overall, I found that the Red Cross is probably the best source to help if you're looking for a way to give. Thank you for letting me share that. And truly, if there's one thing that can help lift the spirits of football fans everywhere, it's playoff games. So let's get into it. As always, thank you for spending some of your time and energy here with me. Before we move forward, let's wrap up the regular season. In week 18, my model went 12 wins and 4 losses straight up, 8-8 against the spread, and 8-8 on totals. That means for the 2024 season, my model's final results are 71.7% straight up, 53.3% against the spread, and 49.8% on totals. This is a great week for trivia, so I'm coming out of the gates with 3 trivia notes that I'll answer at the end of the show, all related to the culmination of the regular season. Trivia question number 1. Name the 2 undefeated teams at home this season. Trivia question number 2. Name the 6 teams to not have a single player with at least 850 receiving yards. Trivia question number 3. Name the 3 teams with 4 players on the defense who each have generated at least 40 pressures. Sunday's games start in Orchard Park, where the Broncos face the Bills. Buffalo is the AFC's number 2 seed and 8.5-point favorites over Denver, who is the 7 seed. The total in this one is set at 47 points. Rookie starting quarterbacks are 0-5 in road playoff games since 2015. The last rookie quarterback to win a road playoff game was, somewhat ironically, Russell Wilson in 2012. Okay, on to the more predictive notes. Bo Nix has thrown for a league-high 904 yards along with 8 touchdowns on passes attempted while on the run, which is defined as traveling at least 8 miles per hour. That's the 4th most by any quarterback in a season since 2016. All 3 of the other season totals, they were achieved by Patrick Mahomes. Nix has thrown on the run on 22% of his passing attempts, which is the 2nd highest rate in the NFL. This year, only Russell Wilson has done it more often. Again, it's just kind of funny. Opposing passers have thrown for 10 touchdowns while on the run against the Bills' defense this season. That is tied for the most in the league. Courtland Sutton led the Broncos with 81 receptions, 1,081 receiving yards, and 8 receiving touchdowns. Sutton had twice as many receiving yards as the next most on the team. That was Marvin Mims with 503 yards. Importantly, in this matchup, Sutton has 13 receptions, ranking 2nd, with 353 receiving yards, that ranks 9th, and 4 touchdowns on deep targets. The Bills' defense has allowed the 7th most yards per attempt on deep passes at 13.3 per attempt. Current Broncos right tackle Mike McGlinchey, who's allowed the 3rd lowest pressure rate at his position this season, forecasts to see a lot of former Bronco Von Miller, who has a league-best 24% pressure rate since the Bills' Week 12 bye. Oh, and if you just look at 3rd down, his pressure rate is 32%. That is also, unsurprisingly, the highest over that span. Speaking of the trenches, on the Broncos defense, Zach Allen led all defensive tackles with 67 pressures this season. If you're looking at all defensive front players, that's the 9th most among all pass rushers, period. 14 of his 67 pressures came when he was double teamed, good for the 5th most, and 8.5 of his 67 pressures turned into sacks. Denver was the only defense with 3 players to each have 20 or more quarterback hits. Had to give some Nick Bonita love here. He had 24. The Broncos also have 6 different players with at least 5 sacks. That's the most in the league. And Pat Surtain led the team in interceptions with 4 and passes defensed with 11, while also ranking top 5 in yards per snap and passer rating allowed amongst all of the corners in the league that were qualified. There were 125 of them. On Buffalo's offensive side of the equation, 13 different Bills players scored a receiving touchdown this season. That is tied for the most in a season in NFL history. 8 different players had at least 2 receiving touchdowns. That is the most this season. And they're also the first team in the Super Bowl era with fewer than 15 sacks allowed and fewer than 15 giveaways in the same season. They have just 14 sacks allowed and just 8 giveaways. They also are just the third team ever to lead the NFL in sacks allowed and giveaways in the same season. Want to know the other two? It was the 1998 Cowboys and 1974 Cardinals. As noted in our Saturday primer, one of my favorite colleagues in our NFL Network Next Gen Stats research department, who happens to be a Bills fan, pointed out that his favorite stat from the regular season is that Josh Allen joined Aaron Rodgers as the only 2 players in NFL history with at least 40 offensive touchdowns in at least 5 seasons. Allen has done it in 5 straight seasons, and he's the only person to do that, while Rodgers did it 6 times over his career to date. Rodgers won MVP in 4 of those seasons, and Allen doesn't have his MVP at least yet. This year, Allen has 12 fewer interceptions than last season and played 72 fewer snaps while trailing. He has the fewest snaps per game in the fourth quarter while trailing at just 8.3. Lamar Jackson has trailed for an average of 17.4 snaps per game in the fourth quarter. That is the 6th most. My interpretation of my colleague's argument is that Allen is locking games up earlier, in large part because he's not turning the ball over, which bolsters the case that his value is higher than any other players this season. Bottom line in this matchup, I have the Bills with an 8-point win, 27-19, and Buffalo winning ranks second of the 6 games in confidence on the week. One key driver is how Josh Allen has handled the blitz. Denver blitzes at the 4th highest rate, 37%, and has allowed 15 of their 22 passing touchdowns when blitzing, compared with only 4 of their 15 total interceptions. Josh Allen has earned 16 touchdowns with only 1 pick when he's been blitzed. That is good for being tied for the second most such passing touchdowns. He also averages 8.5 yards per pass against the blitz. That is 8th most. Another way to show just how great this Bills O-line is, they've only allowed Allen to be pressured on 34% of dropbacks when defenses blitz. That is the 7th lowest rate in the league. The first NFC playoff game happens in Philadelphia and is a rematch of Week 1's first foray into South America. The Packers come to town as the 7 seed to face the Eagles, who are the 2 seed. Philly is a 4.5-point favorite, and the total is 45.5 points. Just a quick note here, both Jordan Love and Jalen Hurts are not 100% good to go as of now. However, my assumptions in coding and the results you're going to hear have them both playing. Jordan Love averaged 18.1 air yards per completion on passes outside the pocket this season. That's the most in the NFL. But he also has the 3rd lowest completion percentage on such passes at 36%. When targeting Jaden Reed on such passes, though, he's 6 of 7, which is a tiny sample size, but also very interesting. Love has also improved against the blitz since the Packers' Week 10 bye, with the 2nd highest completion percentage at almost 73% and the 9th most yards per attempt at 8.9. This is a big deal because he had the 2nd lowest completion percentage at just 52% and 3rd fewest yards per attempt at 4.6 against the blitz before their bye. Overall, the Packers quarterback has been blitzed at the 2nd highest rate in the league, 36% of the time. The Packers offense led the NFL with a 49% called run play rate in the first half of games this season. And apparently situational factors didn't really matter because they had a 15% run rate over expected in the first 30 game minutes. Josh Jacobs gained more rushing yards than expected on 49% of his carries this season, the 3rd highest rate at the position, and his 217 RYOE were 5th most. Let's just do his full context here. He earned 1,329 rushing yards, that's the 6th most in the NFL, and gained 893 of them and scored 10 times on carries between the tackles. Both of those numbers are the most among running backs. 686 of his 893 yards were all earned after contact, which happens to be more in yak than the season totals for between the tackles rushing yards for all but 5 running backs this year. The solution Matt LaFleur will search for in his game plan in this matchup will be accounting for Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis in the middle of the Eagles' defense. As for the Packers' defense, opposing passers completed just 12 of 39 passes after scrambling from the pocket for 110 yards with an interception. That is the 3rd fewest such yards allowed this season and it's an average of just 2.8 yards per attempt, which is the fewest in the NFL. Jalen Hurts was not very efficient, as in inefficient, passing on scrambles this season, as in he has the league's lowest EPA on such passes. Ready for this pro transition? However, switching to the Eagles' offense, Jalen Hurts scrambled on 13% of his third down dropbacks this season, which is the highest rate in the NFL. And when he ran on them, good things happened, as in 71% converted into a new set of downs. Overall, Hurts threw just 10% of his total passes to the area between the numbers and at least 10 yards downfield. That's the second lowest rate in the NFL. However, 4 of his 5 interceptions have come to this area of the field, including both of his Week 1 interceptions against the Packers. To round out the context here, 20% of Hurts's total passing attempts were at least 10 air yards downfield and outside the numbers, which is the 6th highest rate, and an area where the Packers would have really liked to have Jair Alexander. The Eagles ran the ball on a league-high 53% of snaps when facing 2 high safeties this season, making them the only team to run on over half of their snaps when facing this configuration since at least 2016. That's when we first could track this. Saquon Barkley led the NFL with 924 yards and 214 of them being yards over expected when facing 2 high safeties. Barkley also gained 829 yards before contact this season, over 200 more than the next closest running back, that's Jahmyr Gibbs, at 615 yards. Philadelphia's defense has many stars to highlight, but opposing offenses lost 26 EPA when targeting Zach Bond in coverage this season, the 3rd fewest target EPA allowed by a linebacker over the past 5 seasons. This is a big area of improvement for the Birds, as they allowed the 9th highest completion percentage over the middle third of the field last season at 72%, and now are down to the lowest allowed at just under 60%. Bond also allowed 5 yards per target, which is 4th fewest, and rookie Cooper DeJean allowed 4.9. Speaking of DeJean, the Eagles have used nickel at the 3rd highest rate, and since he became the starting nickel in Week 6, they've allowed just 4.2 yards per play, which would be the fewest by any defense since Next Gen Stats started tracking, had that been the number all season long. Bottom line, I have the Eagles taking care of business at home, 26-21, and Philadelphia ranks 3rd in confidence on the week. Defending short passes and limiting yak is a main driver of this projection. Green Bay has used a short pass, so sub-10 air yards, on about 42% of attempts this season, and Jordan Love ranks just 26th, aka not very high, in CPOE and EPA per pass on them. He's about average, ranking 15th in terms of yards per pass at 6.4. Philadelphia has allowed the 2nd lowest CPOE and 3rd fewest EPA and fewest yards per pass on short passes. Oh, and as for yak, because that's all related, the Eagles are 2nd best against it, and the Packers have earned the 3rd most yak per reception. I have to add here that Jair Alexander, who I mentioned before, and Christian Watson being unavailable had a big impact on the score and also the odds for the Pack to make the Super Bowl. This is a great time for our weekly touchdown list. With only 4 games covered in this episode, let's mix 4 big names who we expect to have big games with one who's a matchup upside gem. Number 1, Mike Evans against Washington. As we know, Evans is now tied with Jerry Rice for at least 11 seasons of 1,000 or more receiving yards, and in my model this week, he has the highest odds of anyone of scoring a receiving touchdown on the week. This means in all 6 games. Number 2, James Cook against Denver. With 16 rushing, which is the most such touchdowns in the regular season, and 18 total, that's tied for the 2nd most, he forecasts to reach pay dirt for the 5th game in a row. Touchdown scorer number 3, Justin Jefferson in the Monday Nighter against the Rams. LA's defensive front can certainly bring the heat, but Jefferson is a big mismatch for the back end. Also, I'm going to need some help figuring out what I shouldn't even try to emulate that celebration, but I just want to know what it means. What is it? Stinky? I don't know. I'm a grandma. I need some help keeping it hip. Touchdown scorer number 4, Josh Allen, as in a rushing touchdown against the Broncos. Overall, Allen has averaged the most offensive yards per game, 330.2, and offensive touchdowns per game at 2.7 in the playoffs in NFL history. The pressure potential from the Broncos front tips the scales in favor of Allen's legs in the red area. This means 2 rushing touchdowns from the Bills just based on this list. And touchdown scorer number 5, it's Zach Ertz against Tampa. This is my upside pick. It's actually really close between him and Dalton Kincaid, so I'm going to give you a reason for both. Kincaid has the benefit of lining up where the Broncos defense has a point of weakness, but Ertz happens to be the escape hatch for Jaden Daniels and Cliff Kingsbury for that matter. The veteran also has the presence to navigate away from the strengths of the Bucs defense, which likely includes if or maybe when they get back Antoine Winfield Jr. The Sunday nighter is in Tampa, where the 3-seed Bucs host the 6-seed Commanders. Tampa Bay is a 3.5-point favorite, and the total is 50.5 points in this one. The Bucs and Commanders are both top 5 in scoring offenses, points per drive, rushing yards per game, and offensive touchdowns. Both teams also finished the season on hot streaks. The Bucs finished 6-1, and the Commanders finished 5-0. Washington's offensive line averaged a width of 6.64 yards in the regular season under Cliff Kingsbury. That's the 5th widest in the NFL. You'll see why this matters. Among all rookie quarterback seasons since 2018, Jaden Daniels is the best against the blitz. He ranks first in completions with 101, passing yards with 1,282. He's tied for the most touchdowns at 12. The completion percentage of 65.6% and passer rating of 114.7, they're both number one. And his 8.3 yards per attempt when blitzed ranks second most. He just trails CJ Stroud, who had 8.5 last season. He was also blitzed at the 6th highest rate this year. The wide formation is a smart strategy for a quarterback with the rushing potential Daniels has with respect to defeating pressure, especially in the form of an extra pass rusher. Want more evidence? Daniels scrambled 28 times for 233 yards and 20 first downs on 3rd and 4th down this season. All of those numbers are the most in the NFL and the second most in any season since 2018. The Commanders converted 20 of 23 4th down attempts this season. That's the highest conversion rate. It's 87% by any offense with more than 10 4th down attempts since 1991. On defense, Washington was the only team to have multiple off-ball linebackers generate 20 or more pressures, with Frankie Louvu tying his career high at 29, and Bobby Wagner had 24, his most in a season since at least 2018. Louvu lined up on the line of scrimmage on 32% of snaps overall, but that rate increased to 66% on 3rd and 4th downs. He rushed the passer 213 times in total this season. That's the 3rd most by any off-ball linebacker in the next-gen stats era. The Commanders allowed the lowest completion percentage against quick passes at 68%, but tied for the 2nd most touchdowns allowed to them with 15. Now let's transition over to the Bucs offense, where Baker Mayfield averaged a time to throw of 2.7 seconds. That's the quickest of his career and 8th quickest in the NFL. He threw for the 4th most yards, 1,755, and 2nd most touchdowns, 20, on quick passes this season. He also threw for 1,370 yards, which is tied for 3rd, along with 17 touchdowns, the most, while completing 71% of his passes, the 2nd most, against the blitz this season. The Commanders blitzed at the 8th highest rate. One more Baker stat. He completed 34 of his 47 passes outside the pocket for 406 yards, 5 touchdowns with just 1 pick this season, and that 72.3% is the highest completion percentage on such passes in a season in next-gen stats history. Tampa's defense finished the regular season with the 2nd highest blitz rate, 39%, and the 8th highest pressure rate, 36%. Yaya Diaby led the team in pressures with 57. Levante David led the team in sacks. Anthony Nelson rotated in and had 34 pressures, and Joe Tryon-Sharenka notched 25 more. Diaby also had 13 run stuffs. Fun note here, both teams in this one rank top 2 in yards gained using pony personnel, which is hands down the best personnel grouping name, and who doesn't love 2 halfbacks on the field? Washington has the most yards from it with 687 and a 7.7 yard per play average, and Tampa ranks number 2 in yards with 599, but number 1 in yards per play at 8.3. That's also the 3rd most in the next-gen stats era. Bottom line, I have the Bucs taking this one by 4, 28-24. Tampa winning ranks 4th in confidence and is driven by a confluence of increased health, specifically Antoine Winfield Jr., the pressure rate, Baker Mayfield, and of course, Bucky Irving. The rookie has the highest forced missed tackle rate in the NFL at 36%. He has the 2nd most yards after forcing missed tackles at 4.4 yards after contact. Both of those are the 2nd most in the league. The Commanders do have just the fifth lowest missed tackle rate at 12% and have allowed the fifth fewest yards after contact per carry. So what gives here? Let's dial back and look at the rushing overall. Irving has the fourth most EPA per carry and sixth most RYOE per carry. Washington has allowed the third most yards per carry, fifth highest rushing success rate, and most yards before contact per carry to running backs this season. And last but not least, the number 5 seed Vikings take on the 4th seeded Rams. This game should be in LA, but could get moved to Arizona should these horrible fires not subside. As of now, the Vikings are 1.5 point road favorites, and the total is 47 points. Sam Darnold averaged the third longest time to throw, 3.08 seconds. He attempted 73% of his passes after 2.5 seconds this season. That's the highest rate in the NFL. Darnold averaged 2.99 seconds in the pocket, the longest in the league and the longest by a quarterback in the next-gen stats era. So don't let any memories from last week against the Lions linger too long in your memory. The opportunity is likely different this week. The Rams defense allowed 8.2 yards per attempt and a 42% success rate on passes that took over 2.5 seconds this season, both of which rank 9th highest in the NFL. Darnold targeted Justin Jefferson 41 times when under pressure this season, the most by any quarterback wide receiver duo in the NFL. Jefferson somehow found 3.4 yards of separation, that's the fourth most, which helped lead to 401 yards, which was the most in the NFL when his quarterback was pressured. He threw to Jefferson 45 times on third or fourth down and earned 6 touchdowns on these late downs, which is tied for the second most as well. And on deep passes, Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison combined for the most receptions with 21 and yards with 837, and the most EPA along with 7 touchdowns. Jefferson and Addison are the first teammate duo to ever record over 400 deep receiving yards in a season in the next-gen stats era. Minnesota's defense has generated the 9th highest pressure rate at 36%, but they've allowed the 8th highest completion percentage to quarterbacks under pressure at 53%. Matthew Stafford had a sub 45% completion percentage under pressure, good for the 7th lowest rate in the regular season. This is the first time since 2018 that his under pressure completion percentage has been under 50%. He also threw only 2 touchdowns when under pressure, which is tied for the fewest in the league this season. Viking defenders Andrew Van Ginkel and Blake Cashman were 2 of just 5 defenders to have logged 150 or more snaps rushing the passer, in run defense, and in coverage this season. Cashman is one of just 4 linebackers to record at least 25 pressures and 25 run stops this season. He had 33 pressures and 31 run stops. And Andrew Van Ginkel had 50 pressures along with 28 run stops. As for the Rams, Matthew Stafford used 67 designed rollouts this season. That's the second most in the league. He completed 73% of them for 437 yards, which is the second most. He also had a league-leading 9 touchdowns without a single interception off designed rollouts. This has been his pressure beater this season, as he was only under pressure on 15% of them, and he only took 1 sack on a designed rollout. LA's pass catchers only had 6 drops on 541 total targets this season. That's the lowest drop rate, 1.1%, by any team in the past 7 seasons. Puka Nacua was targeted on 40% of his routes and averaged 3.7 yards per route after returning from injury in Week 8, both of which were the highest marks among wide receivers over that span. Rams defense disguised their coverage by showing a different safety shell, so like single high, split safety, cover 0, pre-snap. And then when the actual play started, they switched it. They did that 48% of the time. That is the highest rate in the NFL. In 8 games, they did it on over 50% of dropbacks, which is the most by any defense over the past 2 seasons. As for this matchup, Sam Darnold averaged 8.4 yards per attempt against disguised coverages. That's the 6th most among qualified quarterbacks. He also has 12 passing touchdowns against them. That's tied for the 3rd most. Bottom line, I have the Vikings winning by 1 point, 23-22. Minnesota's victory ranks 5th of the 6 games in confidence. One of the points to support the Vikings is on deep passes. Sam Darnold leads the league with 28 such completions and 1,023 such yards. He has the highest deep completion percentage. It's 47%, most yards per deep attempt, and is tied for the most touchdowns at 9. The Rams have allowed 10 such touchdowns, that's the 3rd most, and the 6th most EPA per deep pass. Are you ready for some trivia answers? Number 1, the 2 undefeated teams at home this season are the Bills and the Chiefs. Number 2, The 6 teams to not have a single player with at least 850 receiving yards are the Bills, Chiefs, Patriots, Colts, Saints, and Panthers. And number 3, the 3 teams with 4 players who each have generated at least 40 pressures are the Rams, Seahawks, and Broncos. It's time for our wild card weekend menu. Let's stick with what we did for the Saturday games, which means I'm going to put together 2 3-course menus for you. The first will feature 2 bland projections and 1 spicy, and the second menu will feature 1 bland and 2 spicies. Just as a reminder, bland ingredients project to happen in at least 55% of my simulations, and spicy ones happen in 48%, but with enough volatility to make the juice worth the squeeze. Menu number 1. Item number 1, a bland ingredient to start, is Cam Akers to rush for more than 23.5 yards against his former team, Los Angeles. He's coming off a 65-yard outing on the ground against Detroit, and we know the Rams front brings the heat. Also, one of the outlets for Darnold has really become Akers. And while narratives are fun but not always predictive, it does seem fair to think that 24 yards is low when a focus on escaping pressure, keeping pressure away from the quarterback, is paramount. Now, factor in some extra motivation to perform against his former team, and I really like this one. Ingredient number 2, the second bland one, a Kyren Williams to rush for more than 82.5 yards against the Vikings ingredient. On runs between the tackles from weeks 11 onward, Williams averaged 4.9 yards per carry, which is the 9th most at the position, and gained 67 rushing yards over expected, the 5th most. And ingredient number 3, this is the spicy addition to this menu. It is a Bo Nix to rush for more than 24.5 yards against the Bills ingredient. We talked about how Nix has the most passing yards on the run this season. Now factor in that Von Miller, Greg Rousseau, and AJ Epinesa are likely to bring the pressure. This drives Nix to smartly use his legs. And also, he's topped this number in his last 3 games. On to menu number 2. Ingredient number 1, our bland addition to this menu. That's a Bucky Irving touchdown against the Commanders. Irving averaged 6 yards per touch, which is the 4th most at his position. Also, just go back to all the Tampa notes and you can see his yak, missed tackle rate, etc. Spoiler if you missed it, he's at the top of the heap in all of those metrics. Ingredient number 2, our first spicy addition to this menu. It is Saquon Barkley to rush for fewer than 101.5 yards against Green Bay. I am in no way saying that he won't score a touchdown. In fact, that was far too chalky to include in either of these menus or even on this touchdown score list of the week. But the Packers defense, they've allowed just 84 rushing yards per game since their week 10 bye. That's the 3rd fewest over that span. And no individual player has even hit 75 rushing yards in a game over that time either. This one is really not so much about Saquon not being good or the defense being far better. It's more about smart usage. For what it's worth, I have him projected for 98 yards in my median projection, but I think that the Eagles are playing the long game here, as in they aren't going to need Saquon to go over 101.5 yards. Ingredient number 3, which is our second spicy addition to this menu. It's that Courtland Sutton will have more than 63.5 receiving yards against Buffalo. This is spicy in part because Devon Vele and Marvin Mims have had a big uptick in volume and production in recent weeks. In fact, if you're looking at a 4-week sample size, they have top 2 catch rates against zone defense, which is pretty amazing. However, Sutton still has accounted for 46% of the Broncos' downfield targets. That's the 2nd highest downfield target share of any receiver this season. If you want to play it safe, you could consider Mims at over 3.5 receptions. However, I like Sean Payton to scheme up some action for Sutton to the non-Christian Benford part of the Bills' secondary. If you want to tail this play, you can find it on Underdog and get up to $1,000 in bonus cash using the promo code NUMBERS. Happy wildcard weekend. Thank you so much again for hanging out. Projections, scores, and more, they are already posted. So remember, they update when injury reports come out and as news evolves. So keep coming back as often as you like. And if you enjoy this show, please like, subscribe, turn on notifications, pass it along, send it to some friends so we can continue to grow.